Let's come to the presentation this Saturday morning. And this is the 33rd of the year. And we're looking at the way in which a massive scalar of double transform has by now come into play long enough to have an enormous effect. And as they take traction, two aspects at the same time, asymmetry, are going to occur. The symmetry has to do with time, because we live in a civilization whose dynamic is characterized by time in forms, so that time forms are the dynamic of civilization. Before we came into a full-blown civilization, about 4350 BC, the trigger for that was the attainment of a sustainable written language that was discursive enough for people to learn to read and write initially. And it took about 350 years for the first attempts of that then proved successful, had enough time and dispersion so that about 4000 BC, you had a small but growing population of men and women who could read and write. And as they did so, about 4000 BC, it was apparent to them that they had extricated themselves from being able to be satisfied with nature, with the natural cycle. Hence the story of Adam and Eve, who ate from the fruit from the tree of knowledge, an apple, logo, no doubt, and they realized that they were naked in the sense that they were no longer enfolded in the flow of the Eden cultural milieu that man had always been comfortable in and was never naked. Being nude is natural. Being naked is cultural. That cultural shock we need to cover up, especially genitals and all sorts of gender issues. And they were looking for the second tree, the tree of life. When they were closed and not thrown out of Eden, but told that they must go on a quest now, that they are clothed from their nakedness, no longer able to stay in the natural cycle. And so language, which is written and read, is the dynamic by which the time forms of civilization generate an expansion. Because what happens with reading and writing, it's like a royal road to vision, to the visionary consciousness. And the more refined you become, and you do, in learning to read and write in various developments, the more it is that your nakedness needs to be covered, and so the growth of civilization is not the same as the natural cycle of cultures. It becomes increasingly a social realm, which is based upon populations of men and women who are growing in numbers rapidly and who characteristically then collect in cities, hence the term civilization. City-going men and women, because cities are not natural. They're not a part of the natural cycle. It's having come out of what was always naturally sufficient into a new, almost force-fed expansion, where before, to have a collection of many men and women, you were talking of several hundred people at the best. And those large collections of several hundred people were very rare. You might have proto-cities, like in Anatolia at Katulhuliak, that about 6,500 BC had a population of about 400 or 500 people, but they were still within the mythic horizon. They still had the horned bull head, clay insets into their walls. They still were within a growing complexity, for sure, of a cultural milieu, but they were not yet technically cities that were into civilization. They were like a proto type that was coming into play. And the origins of those early kinds of proto-cities were the collections seasonally to come together and harvest the grains and husband the animals and so forth, so that they collected together to process the harvesting, to process the herds and the new children and so forth. It was still cultural. The difference between 4000 BC and 1,000 years later, 3000 BC, is monumental. In that 1,000 years, and remember now that cultural men and women, cultural human beings, on a very intelligent scale, were a part of nature on a very intelligent scale. The earliest cave paintings and sculptures in Europe especially go back 40,000 years. They were marvelously tuned to the complexities of the natural cycle. The cultures were very rich, but they were not civilized. They had not learned that with a visionary application, one can tame the wild. You can bring into play not only more animals, but different kinds of animals by crossbreeding. You could have not only a child, but you could now sustain and have several children or a lot of children. And so by 3000 BC, you began to have whole patterns of very capable urban areas that dominated the countryside, the extensions. And so you had kingdoms. In Egypt, they were called nomes. And by 3000 BC, the patterns of making a federation of groups of these gnomes, large groups. In Egypt, there were 2 collections of gnomes, and by 3000 BC, they were brought together, 2 confederations of gnomes to make one dynastic kingdom. And the first pharaoh, Menes, is the pharaoh of all of Egypt on the Nile River spinal column, from the Mediterranean to the highlands of what is today Sudan. In Mesopotamia, you had a likewise development. In India, a likewise development. In Central Asia as well. In China as well. By 2000 BC, as we have gone into, it had come to a monumental pass that the 1,000-year millennial time form pairs itself to be 2 millennia to be an aeon, a 2,000-year time form. And between 4,000 BC and 2,000 BC is an incredible development. But from 2000 BC to 0 BC is what today we would call a quantum jump. Powered by the ability to have a reading and writing, and hence a talking, a conversing, an oral language of great complexity, so that you could have multiple meanings at the same time. When I am speaking here, I am speaking in such a way that those who acclimate to the hearing of it, to the visioning of it, gain insights, so that many levels, many aspects, many facets actually occur simultaneously. We are at the development now where we're beginning to bring into play qualities that were there in the past that could not be seen then, but can be appreciated now. And hence, it is a new past. Yes, it's past, but it is freshly new. More facets are available. And as that happens, as in the time forms of civilization, it immediately begins to have an effect in language. And for us, at 2000 AD, we have learned that a digitization of language, an ability to read the digitization of language, of write it, not just coding and writing in code, but to be able to read the fruit of the coding, which gives us an access to a future where the new past is going to be prolific to the extent of being disconcerting. And in like ways, the way in which the symmetry of the universe operates, the future also at the same time, in the same way, will seem more and more daunting, is a polite way to say it. If one follows the latest scientific publications on the planet, one of the biggest is Science. The lead cover story, brain-inspired chips. The latest issue of Nature, an even bigger worldwide, planet-wide publication, comes out. They come out every week, like the Sunday paper. Nature has been coming out for 120 some years. here is the road most taken, defining the optimal path through quantum space. And here you begin to recognize not a chaos, but a recognizable swirl. It is a swirl which in this truncated form begins to show the form of a double attractor, which is familiar from chaos theory. That there's no such thing as a chaos, really, that if you run something chaotic enough times, fast enough, it begins to have the double attractor butterfly effect. Show it is a nascent infinity sign, which discloses that even a chaos must emerge out of an eternity. One of the articles in here, which is of great interest, energy studies need social science. And I've put in the handout illustrations a copy of the first page of this article. A broader pool of expertise is needed to understand how human behavior affects energy demand and the uptake of technologies. To secure a safe, reliable, low-carbon energy future, we must alter both technologies and human behavior. The U.S. Department of Energy notes that supply and demand is affected as much by individual choice, preference, and behavior as by technical performance. The sociological, the psychological adjunct to technology is indelibly upon us. There is no way that it not happen and not occur. In fact, at the same time as you get this quality of technology in another weekly science publication, New Scientist, towards time zero, so near the Big Bang and yet so far. And by the way, the auxiliary second most important article, Prisoners of Thought. When random ideas become obsessive fears. And a page of that is also included in your notes, the end of everything, the end of the beginning. It is a quality here of science which comes out in such a way that even on the net, the most popular science website, Science Daily, possible extended symmetries of field theoretic systems. The article, many physical systems from superfluids to mesons are understood to be manifestations of spontaneous symmetry breaking, whereby the symmetries of a system are not realized by the lowest energy state. So all of this, and this is the science of the moment, planet-wide. All of what is not just a cutting edge, but is a cutting refinement of facets of a jewel-like consciousness, which is not limited to an integral unification, which has a symmetrical complement to a differential, expanding scalar that not only expands but has a developmental level by which it jumps into a faster expansion. so that the differential consciousness of vision, after it begins to play not only a part of the civilization, which is already refining multiple cultures and changing the animal, the plant, the mineral, the metal worlds, now has a curious kind of mathematical quality to it, which is covered, incidentally, by recursion theory. That the recursion back, not to something linearly before, not to something even in a set matrix that is different, but the differential expansion of the quality of having a completely new past facet, new future possibilities that come faster and faster, so that one has prisoners of thought when random ideas become obsessive fears. To understand that randomness, a polite term for chaos, has a hidden structure. It has a double attractor. Butterfly, the Greek term for the psyche, is suke. It means in Greek the butterfly. Your psyche is a butterfly that once was a worm, and through a cocooned transform, through an alchemy, it melted into all these fertile juices and grew wings. And those wings, colorful and beautiful, are able, when they are dried, after emerging from the cocoon, able to fly beautifully. So that the time forms of civilization have an increased expansion of men and women who are able to understand that they need to go into a cocooning together on various levels to allow for this transform to occur, and for the butterflies then not only to occur, but to increase the ability for them to participate. They go for the nectar to have more and more butterflies that then are able to populate a rather beautiful world, which is now in jeopardy. It used to be here in Los Angeles about a month ago that one would find great clouds of monarch butterflies. Every year when the cocooning had delivered them and their wings had dried, they would fly up from Mexico. This year you might have seen one or two, because the whole ecology has been interrupted, because the plant world no longer, not only is not natural, it is not civilized, it is demonized. The same is true for animals, the same is true for people. This is intolerable. Demonstrating, having placards, having surveys, having this and that is ineffective. Has no effect whatsoever. Because it requires a change in the alchemy. Because it's in the sabotaged alchemy that it has gone wrong. And a case in point is that the once great alchemical adjunct to civilization for 1,000 years almost was in the Middle East. not only in Egypt, but into the Mesopotamian area of it. So that in between the Egyptian and Mesopotamian, the latest development about 1,300 years ago was the development of Islam, which developed, where is Mecca? Where is Medina? They're in the Arabian Peninsula, where Yemen is, where Saudi Arabia is, where the Gulf oil states are, etc. And within a generation of the development of Islam from Muhammad's prophetic, future-seeing, new past recutting vision, within a generation of that, just before about the 690s AD, there was the introduction of alchemical realization of vision given to one of the prize princes of the new Islamic power, whose distant descendants who have never given up the alchemy are now in grave danger of their collective lives. Speaking of the Yazidis in northern Iraq, who are seeking to be decimated and eliminated by an Islamic State new caliphate in the 21st century, which is the heights of demonic absurdity. Because the name of that original prince was Khalid ibn Yazid ibn Muawiyah, king of the Arabs, who was given the hermetical divine secrets, the revelations of Morianus, ancient adept and hermit of Jerusalem. Khalid and his hermetic guide, his Hermes Trismegistus, Morianus, met about the 680s, almost into the 690s AD. Jerusalem by that time had been for many centuries absolutely ruined, in ruins, abandoned. It looked like a small scale of the Piranesi engravings of the ruins of Rome. It was just a village, and it was god-awful. And Morianus was asked by Khalid, when did you come here? And he said, I came here, and he gives him a corresponding thing. The date is about 645 AD. And I've been here ever since. And no one has contacted me. You're the first. And so I will give you the guidance of how to transform through vision, through differential consciousness. You can transform not only metals and minerals, but their effect on plants and animals, and their recursion effect on yourself and on others like you. You can transform human beings so that they do not do this self-destructive suicide or impose it upon others. This little book is the only document in English on it, published by for Brandeis University Press and the University Press of New England in Hanover, New Hampshire, 1974, Lee Stavenhagen, who found the original, a copy of the original manuscript that people had not paid much attention to, and translated it into English. And it was published in this little volume that almost nobody knows and nobody sees, except that the Hermetic tradition always records that the transmission of alchemy to Islam, to the Arabs, came through Maurenius, Hermit of Jerusalem. That his name was Khalid ibn Yazid was conveniently lost, so that one finds in the newspapers that the Yazidis who are fighting for their genocidal lives right now are those who are not just a religion related to Zoroastrianism that somehow is still tied with Islam, but is in deadly peril demonically from a new caliphate, whereas the original caliphate was about the expansion of the qualities, of the complexities and beauty of Islamic civilization, so that Harun al-Rashid, in the Baghdad of the late 800s, about the 880s, about 200 years after Maurenius instructed Khalid ibn Yazid in alchemy, one had a heyday of Hermetic excellence within Islam, and one of the great studies of it, Muslim Neoplatonists, an introduction to the thought of the Brethren of Purity, the Ikhwan al-Safi, by Ian Richard Nettleton, George Allen Unwin in London. And it's about the era of the Arabian Nights, about how Baghdad at that time, Islam at that time, was spreading into Indonesia and spreading into Spain, and was a great swath of magical, transformed, Hermetic inspired civilization on a very high level. One of the highest in the world. One of the most refined in the world. We live in a time where everything is completely misunderstood because it's not understood at all. The scribe of Yazid, Ghalib, relates as follows, and in it he says, how did this come to be passed on to you? And he says, there was an Ostanes who said to Maria that this is our quicksilver that has dominance over our earth, being very clear and pure, while earth is made of crudest water. And Hermes said that earth is the mother of the elements which are born of her and return to her. Moses too said that all things come of the earth and return to it. As Hermes said, just as all things come of one, so also is the great work done with one thing and one substance. The Maria is Maria the Jewess from Alexandria. Ostanes is an Anatolian wise man who comes to the older Maria, who is no longer in Alexandria, but is in what today we call Asia Minor. In fact, she was at that time in Ephesus, where she had been in Alexandria originally, and was the great alchemist, interpreter, in early 1st century AD Alexandria, of how this actually works. because she had a great teacher, her companion, Jesus in Alexandria. They're the seeds of the whole Hermetic tradition expanding into kaleidoscopic consciousness. Let's take a break. Most improbable realization. Consciousness transforms phenomenal matter. We have a proof here. One of the great achievements of the 20th century is the maturation and work of a man in England, Joseph Needham, not Joseph Campbell. The real savant in this regard was Joseph Needham, who contracted in the late 1940s to write a history of Chinese science. And at Cambridge. And in order to facilitate him, he brought in a couple of Chinese students to Cambridge to help him, because he was being tutored in the Chinese language there at Cambridge and was making progress. And one of the two initial students was a female, a woman. Her name was Li Guaijian, who stayed with him the rest of his life. Eventually, in old age, the two of them, after his first wife finally did die, they were married. They were almost 150 some years old between the two of them. He went many times to China, and eventually Science and Civilization in China became what is now a 20 volume set from Cambridge University Press. Huge volumes, hundreds and hundreds of pages each one, and took 2/3 of a century to get to this point. In China, he went to all of the places that were of interest in developing science and civilization, the two, in China, with Li Guaijian. And he went to a site in China, in Guangdong province, and he took this photograph. This is the body of the sixth patriarch of Zen Buddhism. Hui Neg died almost 1,300 plus years ago, and this is his petrified body. He petrified his body into the consistency of anthracite coal. This is a photograph. This is a photograph of the great sculpture made of him. This is the body. This is his body. Through high-powered, high Dharma transformation. So when it is said that consciousness trumps matter, it trumps matter because it also trumps energy. Yes, E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. Why is it squared? It's squared because of space. And so that matter coming out of space is equal to the energy. And the particulate matter on all scales, even down to the Higgs boson, which is condensed vacuum, they say, has an equational equilibrium with energy, which is time. To understand that the time forms of civilization are double transforms of the time dimension of space-time, out of which comes not only particulate matter, particles, but waves, which is the energy, so that one of the aspects of the standard model of physics coming to haunt quantum field theory. This is the latest textbook in quantum field theory. Just came out. Came out this week. The pre-ordered advanced copy. August 2014. He teaches at Harvard. Well taught. And the central transforming chapters, 13 and 14, out of about 3 dozen chapters, concern Richard Feynman, who is featured in the science phase, phase 8 of the learning civilization. And it's interesting to see that the very qualities of Feynman come through. We use in the science phase of the learning civilization his book QED, Quantum Electrodynamics, in chapter 13, Quantum Electrodynamics. And the whole emphasis of Feynman's work was to develop Feynman diagrams that allow one to use a new kind of differential conscious mathematics to describe quantum electrodynamics to all of its transforms, including quantum chromodynamics, QCD, and coming into play with QFT, quantum field theory, in a big way, so that chapter 14 is path integrals. If you follow a trajectory, it is mechanical. If you follow a path integral, it has that kind of synthesizing quality that allows for one to be specific to any degree of accuracy required, to however many quadrillionths of whatever time you're working with, whatever scalar. Because in experiment and in theory, if you work with the ratios of relationality, they will always have a testing quality of truthfulness of Dharma, because they come out to being resolved into oneness. Like Bode's law of the speed of the orbit changing vis-a-vis the distance from the center, not just the sun with the planets and so forth, but the barycenter, which is the gravitational pivot just outside the corona of the sun in our case. And Bode's law says that all of these major bodies will be at intervals that can be characterized by the ratios of orbital rotational speed in their time, and the space of how far away they are, and the ratio will always be oneness. In fact, Schwartz goes into this, and he has some very wonderful things to say, but he says that there is a problem here with the realization of quantum field theory, that it actually, though it is extremely refined, it has come to an almost impasse, because the more refined that it becomes of being experimentally accurate and theoretically correlate accurate, the more possibilities of being able to prove this on ever finer qualities and calculations, that the field is a mess. Not because it isn't true, it's too much true. All the time, everywhere. And yet, it's apparent that this is unfinished. The integral doesn't cross the T's and dot the I's and put the period. You're dealing with an infinity. One of the ploys to get around this is to racially cleanse the math by taking all of the infinities out of the calculations. In which case you can come to very accurate correlations, the experiments, the theory. Yeah, it's all really nice. Because you can go through a whole filtering, cleansing technique and system called renormalization. You take the math that is cleansed of the infinities, and then you can apply it to stuff in the universe. No one mentions that it's provisional, and it is not real. It is a case in point, literally. It can be as fine or as wide a case in point. It's not real. It's provisional, and it's provisional because the mentality, the mind, correlates to the ritual. The symbols and the ritual correlate. That's where the equal sign is. The equal sign is that it has commandeered the mythic language, the oral language, even the written language, even the ritual comportment, doing, action language. The vision is not complete. It's incomplete. And when one looks at mankind as a kaleidoscopic spectrum of persons, one can see that there is no such thing as a mankind that is unified. Most conspicuously, there's not only a double gender, but as Lawrence Durrell said in the Alexandria Quintet, Alexandria seems to have more than 5 sexes, and about that we have a lot to write. But it also is that the human species, Homo sapiens sapiens, has many different races and combinations of races without limit. One of my close friends at the University of Wisconsin in the 50s. His name was Gooch. He was about 350 pounds, and he was too big to play football anymore. And his girlfriend was a little Korean woman, and they loved each other. Like John Lennon and Yoko Ono. They went together, they fit. Mankind has a whole spectrum of incredible variety, to the extent that one can characterize it as kaleidoscopic. We have been looking at the way in which what is a mess is the misunderstanding of history, which leads directly to the shibboleth-ridden status raised to a level of imperial tyranny of science which is not real. Yes, it's very good at getting into the probabilities and the approximations and so forth, but what is left out increasingly becomes haunting until what is combed out shows that what has been left out is everything. To not know that space is dark matter is really dumb. To not know that space has, in fact, had a finite beginning where it emerged instantly because there was instantaneousness previously, so that dark energy is time. Not just is time, but that time space then is fully almost 95% plus of what is actual in the phenomenal universe, which has emerged out of an infinite eternity, which is real. We've been looking at the way in which the development, for instance, in India, as a case in point, for the last 3,500 years, has been increasingly skewed to a misunderstanding that there was an Aryan invasion of dark-skinned natives who were just in the way of a very powerful system of civilization. And this has not been true ever. We have looked at the way in which the latest translation, 2014, of the Rig Veda, this is first of 3 volumes, translated largely by Stephanie W. Jameson. We're going to talk about 4 women who have transformed India now, the last few decades. Sacrificed wife, sacrificer's wife, women, ritual, and hospitality in ancient India. She's one of the 2 the major translator of the new edition of the Rig Veda, which for the first time puts the entire Rig Veda into the English language so that one can read all 1,081 of the various. Here is an example of her translation. Most of the Rig Veda hymns are not to Indra, who is the Zeus of India, the king of the gods, the thunderbolts and everything, but the first, most prolific dedications are to Agni, the god of fire. Energy as a primordial flame before there's a king of gods. You, Agni, in the lap of your two parents, the god wakeful among the gods, O faultless one, become body creator, father, and fatherly solicitude for our bard, our poet writing this. The one writing it says, for me, that I am able to hymn this. You, lovely one, have strewn every good thing here. You, Agni, are fatherly solicitude. You are a father to us. You are creator of vitality. We are your kin. Riches in hundreds, in thousands converge on you, the well-heroed protector of the commandment, O undeceivable one. You, Agni, did the gods create as the first Ayu, for Ayu, as the clan lord of Nahosa, Ida they created as instructress of mankind, that the son Agni is born of a father as trifling as me, the sacrificer. That there is a female guidance of wisdom, a mother, and that this mother is mother of wisdom, is the receiver of the fertility of that fatherliness, is the mother of that child, of that son, of that daughter, of life. And all of this is a quality that comes out again and again in the Rig Veda, hymns to Agni. And Agni in the Veda is definitely the kind of radiant flamedness which is characterization of some 400 years before in Zarathustra's Gathas. Zarathustra, about 1925 BC, in writing the Gathas, the central manifester quality is Mazda. She's radiant. And she has, in the Gathas, a lord of the ability to make sure that this radiant wisdom, honorific, is able to be conducted into the fertility of things, Ahura. And that the two of them together, like two primordialities, like in the I Ching, all of the yang together, all of the yin together, the creative and the receptive, come together and have a triple level, a three sets of pairs that occur, so that those three sets of pairs constitute the way in which the unbroken lines of the male, and it's not the broken lines of the female, of the yin, it's the receptive lines. It's better to say not unbroken and broken, but of saying creative, as in a continuity, and a receptive, as in an eternity. able to receive a continuity that is fertile spontaneously in time, instantly in space, of any quantity whatsoever. The fact that you can win a crapshoot on your mass in this game doesn't hold much outside the casino. The restaurant at the end of the universe, never even heard of it. So one of the women is Stephanie Jamison, and we've talked about another one of the women, Malati Shengi, who showed that it isn't a question of the civilized demons, the Harappans in Rig Veda, that the original dark-skinned Indians were really the sophisticated civilization builders. Those who came in were fleeing from conditions, and they came in as nomadic, which was their basic heritage. Zarathustra's family in ancient Avestan, Zarathustra is Zarathustra. Zarat means good with, or and Ustra is camels. He's good with camels. He runs good caravans from Samarkand east all the way into China through the Gobi Desert. Not through the desert, but around the desert to the south. Not the later Silk Road at the north. It's what I call the Jade Road on the south, the Kunlun Mountains. But it's about the Dragon Mountains. The northern ones is around the Tian Shan Mountains. It's about heaven. The dragons were originally there. And all the way to the west, as far as Ireland, 4,000 years ago, at least. In the Boyne River Valley in Ireland, off the Irish Sea and up the Boyne River, quite a little spell a ways, New Grange was built and finished in 3200 BC. It took at least 500 years to a millennium to just amass the traditions and pass them on of the correlations of the positions of the sun and the moon and the stars and so forth, to be able to set it up so that the midwinter sunrise exactly shines the only time in the year through the top clerestory opening, not where men and women walk to and fro, but where the midwinter sunlight sends its shaft at dawn on the midwinter solstice all the way down and illumines a triple spiral on a great rock, a architectural positioning of what would be in a cave, a stalactite, and illuminates the triple spiral. One of the most ancient qualities of being able to show the triple pair. Because one thing about pairing, when it's dynamic, is that they rotate chirally both ways. And that ambidextrous chiral rotation, if one understands it in its true high Dharma form, is a triple spiral. It's there, 5,200 years ago, complete. And Naus and Daus were built so that there were the three together and made this whole monastic enclave 5,000 years ago in Ireland. So don't be surprised that 3,000 BC, 5,000 years ago at the same time, in India is Fushi and Nugua, making the seed for the I Ching. Not only the double 3 lines making a hexagram, but that one can take visually the quality of the movement. The changes are not the changes like in spare change. They're not the changes in like it's a different condition. The changes are that one goes into this first, that second, this third level. Good, better, best. High Dharma, that one can take what is moving, in this case, the receptive line and the creative line, and both of them move 1, 2, 3. And the fourth is those 3 that are not abstracted, but those 3 that are visioned together, constituting another high Dharma pair, making 8. So that you get pairs squared, squared. 2 to the third, 2 cubed. It's as simple as that. It's as complex as that. Along with Stephanie Jamieson and Maladi Shengya, we added the great investigation of Amaravati Stupa on the Krishna River in southeast India, and Anamika Roy published in 1994 in New Delhi her beautiful quality of understanding is that this stupa, like its world-class mate, originally came because of Ashoka, who set up Sanchi in the middle of India, and cognate places, stupas, all over India, and each one of them was heralded by a pillar that had 4 lions at the top in MGM roaring, here it is. And all of the simple edicts of the rule of all of India were listed there so that you could read them. And the edicts of Ashoka, who was half black Indian, half Greek Indian. He was a mulatto. He's the one that set up the initial ones, and it took a great black Indian sage, architect Nagarjuna, to come back and redo the Ashokan beginnings at Amaravati on the Krishna River and his home place of ashrams at Nagarjuna Kanda, the hill of Nagarjuna, both on the Krishna River, both within about 70 some miles of Hyderabad, a very large city in India, many millions of people. And even then, a very powerful, the Raja of Hyderabad has always been really powerful. The fourth woman is the woman who just did the Buddhist art of Nagarjuna Kanda, Mrs. Rama Krishnamurthy. Her volume just came out not too long ago, 1994, but she is the first one to be able, because her husband was their archaeologist in charge, the Archaeological Survey of India, of that whole area for many, many years. She's the one that had the vision that nobody has understood the sculptures and the friezes, the illustrations of what is going on here. At Nagarjunakonda, at Amaravati, and everything had to be reconstructed, and in reconstructing they brought back all kinds of interesting sculptures. And she is the one that found that if you use a visionary scaler and you are able to follow what is happening here, and you're literate, you've read a lot, you can recognize, not just identify, you can recognize. She put it together that what you have here are in stone friezes and sculptures. A very great many of these are of a Jataka. The Jataka tales, there are about 500 some Jataka tales as a classic collection. It takes 3 volumes in English translation to translate them. The first translator was E.B. Cowell in the 19th century, and later on Ernst Rhys Davids did it in the 20th century. It's a particular Jataka tale, tales of the Buddha's previous life. When he was various animals, he was various people. And this one is the Mandatu Jataka. The Mandatu Jataka occurs in 18 panels at Nagarjunakonda. It also occurs at Amaravati and at Bhaja, another cave site. Its elaborate representation in Andhra Disa, that means Andhra Pradesh. Andhra Pradesh is in the far south, and it's just above Tamil Nadu. The big city in Tamil Nadu used to be called Madras, it's called Chennai. And Andhra Pradesh is just north of it, contiguous, not far from Madras, and extends up to the Krishna River and the great Godavari River. And from Andhra Pradesh, some of the great wisdom savants of all time have come. In our time, Krishnamurti came from there. Around 2,000 years ago, Nagarjuna came from there, who combed through and recalibrated all of Buddhism so that he traditionally is called in the Mahayana and the Vajrayana the second Buddha. She found that you can understand what you're looking at if you take the mythology in its special variant. It's not just anybody's version of this Jataka tale. The version is specifically that of Ashvaghosha, because he wrote a whole life of the Buddha called the Buddha Karita, which we have in English translation, classically, published at Oxford. And Ashvaghosha is the founder of the Mahayana. And he wrote the Buddha Karita to show what is coming up from the new past understood. It isn't just the Buddha who is the Buddha, he was all of these people, all of these animals, and went through all of these 500, half a thousand Arabian Nights tales to get to where he was the Buddha, and now he is in resonance. Even more kinds of people, more kinds of animals, more kinds of tales than you could imagine, and so his follow-up to the Buddha Karita, written about 90 A.D., Shraddhopada Sutra, the awakening of faith in the Mahayana. Shraddhopada Mahayana Sutra. The founding of the Mahayana by the awakening of faith. Never in any of the 17,000 sutras does Buddha talk about faith. Who talks about faith? Hands? Jesus in Alexandria and Mary Magdalene. Who sent St. Thomas to India? He traveled with St. Matthew as far as St. Matthew went to Ethiopia, because India and Ethiopia are twins. They've been paired since 1500 BC. Because while the Rig Veda originators, the Vedic so-called invaders, the refugees who were taken in by the native dark Indians because they had plenty of food. We've talked about the huge granary at Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. And when we come next week, we'll see that all of this has a development which leads directly to the 20th and 21st century. Because these four women have recut India, and every aspect of history needs to be recut now. That's called the recalibration. More next week.